Story 1. The 314 print job that no one sent. This happened to me in 2019. At the time, I worked night security for a mid-sized architecture firm in Denver. The building was 5 stories tall, with a glass atrium, polished concrete floors, and rows of silent cubicles. I worked alone from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my only real task was to monitor the surveillance feeds and log any maintenance issues. It was mostly peaceful, and I liked it that way. The office always smelled faintly like printer toner and citrus cleaning spray. The fluorescent lights stayed off overnight, and the building sat in silence except for the quiet hum of HVAC systems and the occasional distant echo of water pipes expanding. After the first few weeks, I got used to the quiet. I'd do my rounds every hour, check that the doors were locked, glance through the dim office floors, and then settle back in the break room with a paperback or my laptop. Sometimes I'd nap lightly in the early morning hours, setting alarms to make sure I woke up for the final walkthrough before staff began arriving. One morning around 3:30 a.m., I woke up from a strange dream. I had fallen asleep on the couch in the break room with the lights off. In the dream, I was walking through the 4th floor, but everything looked slightly off. The cubicles were lower, the carpet darker. Someone was whispering the same word repeatedly, beneath. When I woke up, my head was foggy. I rubbed my face, sat up and noticed that the security monitors were still glowing quietly in the dark. I got up to stretch, stepped into the hallway, and then I heard it. The sound of the 4th floor printer finishing a job. That shouldn't have been possible. All workstations required individual logins, and no one had been in the building since I clocked in. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, then took the elevator to the 4th floor. The floor lights were off, but emergency LEDs gave everything a dull, bluish glow. I walked through the cubicles toward the back printer. There was a single page on the output tray, still curled slightly at the corners like it had just come through. The paper was blank, except for one word in black Arial, centered in the middle. Beneath. I didn't know what to make of it. I thought maybe someone had queued it up remotely earlier that day, or it was a test page from maintenance. I logged the incident and left it at that. The next night around the same time, I dozed off again, and I had another dream. This time, I was standing in the break room. The lights were flickering, and someone was standing just outside the glass door, their features obscured by motion blur. I remember the sensation of being watched, not menacing, just observed. Again, a voice, though quieter than before, whispered a single word: refuse. I sat up straight, heart lightly pounding. I checked the wall clock, 3:14 a.m. 30 seconds later, the printer on the 4th floor activated again. I didn't move at first. I just listened. The smooth pull of the rollers, the final click, and then silence. I went up, slowly this time. The page was waiting for me. Same font, same placement. One word: refuse. The third night, I didn't fall asleep. I made coffee. I walked laps around the building. I even propped my eyelids open with my fingers a few times just to be sure. Still, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the printer activated. The paper read, observe. At that point, I started documenting everything in a notebook. I double-checked printer logs. Nothing. The jobs didn't appear in the system queue. I checked with IT. They couldn't trace any remote access or internal activity at those hours. I ran virus scans on the printer, scanned for malware on every terminal, even asked one of the daytime techs about auto-test scripts. Nothing. And yet, every night, 3:14 a.m., without fail, a single page would print. Always a new word. Wait. Forget. Inside. Each one more unsettling in its vagueness. I told myself it had to be a prank, someone on staff scheduling ghost prints just to mess with me. But deep down, I didn't believe that. It was the timing, the dreams, the way each word felt like a response to my thoughts from the night before, like someone or something was watching me not with eyes, but from inside my own mind. I started to dread closing my eyes at work. Sleep became a risk. The dreams always came between 2:50 and 3:10 a.m., just minutes before the next word would print. Listen. Now. Yours. I never told anyone at the company. I was afraid they'd think I was unstable or sleep-deprived, which, to be fair, I probably was. But I know what I experienced. It wasn't just coincidence. Fear doesn't come from random events. It comes from patterns, from the sense that something invisible is watching and waiting while you sleep. About 2 weeks in, I started testing things. I brought my own printer paper and swapped out the tray after hours to see if the messages would stop. They didn't. If anything, the words got more pointed. One night, I removed the printer entirely, unplugged it, even wheeled it into a conference room and locked the door. I thought that would end it. But when I woke up from another brief nap, there was a single sheet resting face up on the break room table. The word on it was "Defy." The next night, I set up my phone on a tripod, facing the printer, and hit record. I wanted to catch the moment it activated. I figured I'd fall asleep again, like always, and then review the footage. I woke up at 3:21 a.m. The printer hadn't made a sound, but the paper was already there. I checked the footage. My phone had captured hours of silent video. And the moment I rewound to 3:14 a.m., nothing happened. No mechanical movement, no light, just silence. Then, at 3:15:12, a frame skip. And suddenly, the paper was there, still warm. I checked the tray. It had one fewer sheet, but the machine hadn't moved. I rewound the footage over and over. I even slowed it down to frame-by-frame playback. There was no transition, just presence. The next night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat next to the printer staring at it. I set an alarm for 3:13 a.m. and kept both eyes wide open. Still, at 3:14 exactly, there was a soft breeze. That's the only way I can describe it. A faint air movement, like the heat kicked on for a second. Then I looked down. The paper was there, just like before, only this time it didn't say a word. It had a shape, a square, 4 black lines forming a perfect hollow box. Nothing else. I didn't touch it. I didn't log it. I left it there and walked out. That morning, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before going home. I couldn't explain the timeline anymore. These print jobs weren't happening in real time. They were appearing just before I noticed them, as if anticipating my awareness. I called my sister the next day. She asked if I'd been sleeping okay. I told her I was fine. I wasn't. The hallucination theory made sense on paper. Lack of sleep, low-light environments, repetitive tasks, the perfect storm for occupational disassociation. But that didn't explain how the printer had an accurate log of reduced paper without jobs being queued. It didn't explain the video skip. And it didn't explain what happened next, because the following night I stayed in the security office the entire time. Never left the room, never left my chair. My eyes barely blinked. Still, when I stood up at 4 a.m. to do my final walkthrough, there was a page on the floor outside the break room. Return. The printer had been powered down. I had pulled the cord from the wall myself. It was cold. The paper was not. By the 3rd week, I stopped trying to resist. I wrote the words down in order, filled an entire legal pad. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I barely went outside during the day. I slept with my blinds closed, kept the lights off, and didn't tell anyone what was happening. The dreams began shifting. They weren't verbal anymore. I'd see shapes, diagrams, floor plans. Sometimes I'd wake up with pen marks on my arms, like I'd been writing something in my sleep. One dream involved a voice, not speaking, but humming. A single frequency, not melody, just a tone. It came from the break room walls. That night, the page said, "Listen again." I lost weight. I stopped answering texts. And then came the moment that I still can't explain. I handed in my resignation. Told HR I had family stuff to deal with. They didn't ask questions. I cleared out my locker, turned in my key card, and left. That was a Thursday. Friday night at exactly 3:14 a.m., my home printer activated. I hadn't used it in over a year. I'd never synced it with anything except my laptop. It wasn't connected to Wi-Fi anymore. I'd unplugged the router 2 days before. But it turned on, it warmed up, and it printed. A single page, clean and crisp. The word on it was, "Continue." I stared at it for a long time. I felt nothing, no fear, no anger. Just the dull pressure of something bigger than understanding. Like I had crossed a threshold without knowing. I threw it away. The next night there were 2 pages. One said, "Location updated." The second, "Watch." Since then, I've moved. New apartment, new job. I don't own a printer anymore, but a week ago, someone slid a page under my door. Just one word. Still. Story 2. The elevator that only stopped for her at night. This happened to me in late 2018. I was 26 at the time, working night logistics at a private hospital in the northwest part of the city. My shift started at 7 p.m. and ended at 3:30 in the morning, Monday through Friday. I wasn't medical staff. I handled supply chain, distributing IV bags, linens, surgical kits, anything the clinical teams needed. We were a small department and mostly worked alone. The hospital itself was old. It had been expanded over the decades. First a trauma unit, then a cardiac center, and most recently a diagnostic wing. But the main building dated back to the 1950s. There were still patches of terrazzo flooring on some levels, old stairwells with metal railings that had been painted over a dozen times, and narrow maintenance corridors behind the new construction that no one really used anymore. I usually moved supplies between the basement and the upper floors. There were 3 elevators in our area. 1 visitor elevator, 1 freight, and 1 staff only. The staff elevator was the most direct, and it had a kind of familiarity to it. I liked it because the lights were always a little dimmer, and I could zone out while the cart and I rode in silence from floor to floor. The interior was stainless steel, brushed and slightly worn, with 2 flickering fluorescent tubes overhead and a small security camera in the corner. There was a full mirror panel along the back wall. I remember noticing early on how muted the reflection was, like it didn't quite catch movement unless you were looking directly at it. It reminded me of hotel elevators, the kind that always feel just a little behind your actions. One night around 2:45 a.m., I was bringing up a cart of latex gloves from the sub-level storage. I was alone. It was one of those nights where the building feels more like a sealed vessel than a place of healing, quiet in a way that presses in on you. I wheeled the cart into the staff elevator, pressed 3, and stepped back. As the doors began to close, I looked at my reflection, only it didn't look right. My face was still, too still, but my body swayed just slightly, the way you do when adjusting your weight during a long wait. But the movement wasn't reflected. I stared at the mirrored wall. My torso was still in the reflection, locked like a photograph, but I could feel myself swaying, my breath shifting my balance. Then the elevator moved. That's when the reflection caught up. A subtle jerk, like a tape skipping forward. I blinked and shook my head, chalked it up to sleep deprivation, long shifts, fluorescent light distortion. But the next night, the same thing happened. Only this time I stood perfectly still. I held my breath. I waited. And still, the reflection moved first. My mirrored torso shifted a split second before I did, like it had made the decision, not me. I started avoiding the mirror after that. I'd stand sideways in the elevator or look down at the floor, but I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. Not through the camera, but from the mirror itself. I mentioned it once to the guy in maintenance. Just casually, something like, "You ever notice that elevator mirror's a little off?" He looked at me for a second too long before saying, "You've seen it too then?" That was all he said. There were 2 basement levels in that building. B1 was the main logistics and maintenance floor. B2 was different. Officially, B2 was storage overflow, unused space kept clean but unoccupied. It had tile floors and pale green walls, but no equipment, no storage racks. Just empty halls and a few locked doors. I rarely went there. One night, near the end of my shift, I got a notification that a delivery had been routed through the old dumbwaiter shaft. That system hadn't been used in years, But someone from upstairs apparently sent down a mislabeled container and it needed to be retrieved from B2. I was already tired, but I figured I'd finish the job and go home early. I took the elevator down to B2. The doors opened into a corridor I hadn't seen in months. The lights were on, humming faintly. Everything looked untouched. The kind of clean that isn't new, just undisturbed, dustless but aged. I pushed my empty cart forward, letting the wheels click softly on the tiled floor. Then I heard something, faint, maybe 30 feet ahead, behind the wall, crying, not wailing, not gasping, just a soft rhythmic sound, like someone crying into their own hands, a sob suppressed rather than expressed. It was behind the vent grate to my right, where the wall was lined with what looked like old ductwork. I stopped walking and listened. The sobbing didn't change cadence. It was steady, like a loop, but not artificial. It had weight. You could hear breath breaking at the edges. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" Nothing changed. No shift in pitch, no startled silence. Just the sound continuing behind the wall. I moved closer, crouched near the vent and said again, softer this time, "Can you hear me?" The crying paused, then continued, but it had moved, slightly farther now, as if whoever it was had taken a slow step away from the wall. I stood and backed up. The hallway stretched in both directions, empty and pale. I left the cart and walked toward the end of the hall. There was nothing. No sign of the container I was supposed to pick up. I waited, then turned around and made my way back. The sobbing was gone. I pushed the elevator button and waited. When the doors opened, the lights inside flickered. I caught my reflection again, still slightly off. My face was turned toward the mirror. My reflection stared straight ahead. The next morning, I asked our internal logistics coordinator for a floor blueprint, an excuse about mapping new cart routes. He handed me a folder with old scans from the archives. There was no B2. I asked if it was an error. He told me the building originally had a second basement, but it was sealed off during the 80s after asbestos remediation and low-use justification. I told him I'd been there just last night, that the lights were on, that the corridor was clean. He frowned, then flipped through another set of papers and said, that shouldn't be accessible. It's supposed to be shuttered." That night, I tried again. I pressed the elevator button for B2. The button didn't light up. I pressed it again. Nothing. I tried B1. The elevator moved. When the doors opened, I was already at B2. No motion, no delay, just a soft ding and open doors facing that same pale green corridor. I didn't step out. I just stood there, staring at the hallway. This time, the lights were dimmer. One was flickering near the end. There were no sounds. I looked at the vent. Something moved behind it, not fast, just a subtle shift in shadow, like someone leaning back from a peephole. I stepped backward into the elevator, hand hovering near the closed door button. Then I heard it, not crying this time, a voice. It whispered, "You're late." The door didn't close. I hit the button again and again. It stayed open. Something moved again, behind the grate. I stepped forward and slammed the emergency stop. The doors began to close. Just before they shut, I saw it. A hand reaching through the vent, thin, pale, fingernails too long. The next day, I went straight to HR. I requested a shift change, anything to stay off the night schedule. I told them I was having sleep issues. I lied and said I was seeing things. They nodded, didn't question it. They transferred me to mornings. I never saw B2 again, but sometimes when I dream, I'm standing in that elevator, and my reflection moves before I do. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The patient who checked in after death. This happened to me in 2021, during the height of post-COVID staffing shortages. I was working nights as a telemetry nurse at a private regional hospital in upstate New York. My floor specialized in step-down cardiac patients, people not critical enough for ICU, but still requiring constant monitoring. Heart rate, blood pressure, O2 saturation, respiration patterns, everything fed into a central nurse's station where we tracked it all. The work was technical but repetitive. A lot of silent observation. A lot of cross-checking patient data against machine anomalies. I liked the quiet of the night shift. It gave me space to think. Too much space sometimes. We had 24 beds on the floor, all connected to telemetry. Each monitor had a 4-digit ID tied to patient wristbands and updated automatically with admissions. Once someone discharged or passed away, their ID cleared from the system and reset. Or at least, it was supposed to. On a Thursday night in October, I was reviewing vitals for a newly admitted patient. Female, mid-70s, in for a mild cardiac arrhythmia. I tapped into her monitor through the central system and noticed something strange immediately. Her pulse waveform looked familiar. Not in a general way, familiar in detail. The curve of the spikes, the slight dip in oxygen saturation every 90 seconds, even the erratic sleep apnea pattern during rest cycles. It mirrored something I'd seen before. I checked her live feed. 73 BPM, 92% O2, intermittent apnea. I opened a second window and began searching old records. Something about it was gnawing at me. I pulled up patient history logs by waveform profile and sorted for anomalies. That's when I saw it. The exact same vitals, identical apnea intervals, same saturation drops, same arrhythmia waveform. Even the pulse artifact, the tiny blip caused by a tremor in the patient's left hand, was the same. The name on the old chart, Clara Mendez. She died 2 months earlier. Bed 19. The match wasn't just close. It was perfect. It didn't make sense. Patients might have similar vitals, sure, but waveform profiles don't copy like that. Each person's heartbeat is like a fingerprint. How it manifests digitally is uniquely shaped by anatomy, pathology, age, and meds. What I was seeing was an exact overlay. I double-checked the telemetry unit's serial numbers, different machines, different patients, but the data matched line for line. It felt wrong. Not medically wrong, conceptually wrong, like a page had been reprinted inside a different book. I called down to biomedical engineering, asked them to run a diagnostic. They said they'd take a look in the morning. I told them it wasn't urgent. I didn't want to sound like I was chasing ghosts, but that's what it felt like, because Clara had died on my shift. The next night I arrived 15 minutes early. I wasn't assigned to bed 19 that night. It was empty, but something had pulled me back there. It was past 2:30 a.m. when I made my way down that side of the hall. Most lights were off, just the low hallway glow striping the floor tiles. Bed 19 had no patient, no orders, no active monitor, but the blanket was freshly folded, not sterile tucked like housekeeping would do, but gently draped, like someone had just gotten up and straightened it. I stood at the doorway. The temperature was slightly warmer, not uncomfortably so, just enough to notice. I stepped inside slowly, letting my badge tag the entry on the scanner, or so I thought. The green light didn't blink. I stepped back, then forward again. Still nothing. I pulled out my work phone and checked the badge logs manually. It said I had already entered bed 19 at 3:06 a.m. The current time was 2:58. I frowned and refreshed the system. Same result. The system was showing an access log for a future time. I stood in the doorway for another few seconds. The blanket on the bed hadn't moved, but I swear the air in the room felt active, not windy, just present. I touched the edge of the blanket. It was warm, not body warm, not alive, just retained heat, the way a chair might feel after someone's been sitting in it for a while. I lifted the corner. Nothing beneath, no scent, no signs of linens recently changed, just that weightless warmth. I left the room, didn't write it up, didn't mention it during handoff. The following day, I got an email from security. It said, "Your badge registered access to room 319 at 3:06 a.m. No corresponding video data. Please confirm this was you." I opened the footage from the hallway cam. At 3:06 a.m., the door to room 319, bed 19 opened. No one entered, no one left. The door opened, then slowly closed again. I wasn't the only one who noticed strange behavior after that. A week later, a float nurse doing nights on our floor mentioned something in passing. She said one of the monitors kept beeping, even though the room was empty. She'd muted it 3 times. Eventually, she unplugged it. That monitor was bed 19's. I asked her if she remembered what time it started beeping. She said around 3 a.m. I nodded, didn't press. The day after, telemetry called from downstairs. They said they were getting live feed noise from a patient ID that didn't exist. They read off the digits. It was Clara Mendez's old ID. The nurse on that room checked. No monitor was attached. But on the main board, a live feed was blinking in green. BPM 73, O2 sat 92%, atrial flutter with apnea intervals, same pattern. Again, they rebooted the system, it disappeared, until the next night. I was on that shift. At exactly 3:06 a.m., the central monitor chirped. A new patient appeared in bed 19. The name field was blank. Vitals streamed in. Line for line, they matched Clara's. I walked to the room. It was dark. The blanket still folded neatly. The monitor glowed softly, casting shadows across the floor. No one was in the bed. I looked down at the machine. The ID tag was Clara's, her exact numeric profile. I reached forward to turn it off. The waveform spiked, just once, like a jolt. I froze. The screen held steady for several seconds. Then the line went flat. I stood there, heart pounding, hand still hovering near the button. Then slowly, without sound, the screen changed, not to black, to white. It displayed one message, not discharged. I stepped back. My badge pinged. The scanner read, exit, bed 19, 3:06 a.m. I hadn't moved for almost 10 minutes. That was the last time I tried to shut the machine off manually. The next night I tried something different. I entered the room just before 3:00 a.m. The monitor was blank. I stood at the foot of the bed and spoke softly. I said, Clara, you're not admitted here anymore. At first, nothing changed. Then the monitor flickered. The waveform reappeared for a second. Oxygen saturation dipped, rose, then stopped. The screen powered down. I left the room. I never told anyone what I'd said, but the system stopped receiving Clara's telemetry after that. No more unexplained access logs, no more phantom badge entries. Still, I sometimes dream of bed 19, and in those dreams I arrive just as someone else is leaving. Not walking, just gone, as if they were never meant to stay.